a waitress shouted to a millionaire. "Don't eat that! Your wife put poison in it!" Upon arriving at his mansion to confront his wife, the millionaire froze when he saw what she was doing. Ryan Carter adjusted his cufflinks as he stepped into the gourmet haven, the soft hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses wrapping around him like a familiar melody. It was Friday evening, his regular night to dine at the upscale restaurant nestled in the heart of Greenwich, Connecticut. For Ryan, this wasn't just a place to eat. It was a ritual, a slice of consistency in his otherwise chaotic life as a millionaire businessman. The maitre d' greeted him with a warm smile and led him to his usual table near the floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city's glittering skyline. Ryan settled into the leather chair, his tailored suit catching the golden glow of the chandelier overhead. The aroma of truffle oil and freshly baked bread filled the air, but tonight, his focus drifted. At the corner of the dining area, Ashley Miller moved with quiet determination, balancing a tray of dishes as she weaved between tables. Her worn sneakers contrasted with the polished floor, but her movements were precise, almost rehearsed. Ashley wasn't here by choice. She worked long shifts to support her younger siblings after losing her parents in a tragic accident. To her, every tip meant groceries. Every shift meant survival. "Good evening, Mr. Carter," Ashley greeted him as she approached his table. Her voice was steady, polite, and tinged with exhaustion. Ryan looked up, his sharp blue eyes meeting hers for the first time in weeks. He gave a curt nod. "Evening, the usual." "Of course," she replied, scribbling on her notepad before vanishing toward the kitchen. As the evening unfolded, Ryan couldn't shake the sense that something was off. At the table next to him, two women were engaged in an intense, whispered conversation. He wasn't one to eavesdrop, but their hushed voices carried snippets of phrases that caught his attention. "Make sure he eats it. Jennifer insists." Ashley passed their table, and though she didn't pause, her eyes flickered toward the women. She could feel it. Something wasn't right. After years of working here, her gut instincts rarely failed her. As she brought Ryan his glass of wine, her mind raced, replaying the snippets of the women's conversation. Minutes later, Ryan's entree arrived. A beautifully plated lamb dish, artfully garnished with rosemary sprigs. The waiter placed it down with a flourish, and the women's conversation abruptly stopped. Ashley's pulse quickened as she saw one of them lean forward, her gaze fixed on Ryan. Her hands trembled as she approached his table again. She knew she shouldn't interfere, but every fiber of her being screamed that she had to. "Mr. Carter," she blurted out, her voice urgent but low enough not to draw attention. "Don't eat that." Ryan frowned, his fork hovering midair. "Excuse me." She glanced over her shoulder at the two women, who were now watching intently. Leaning closer, she whispered, "Your wife. I think there's poison in that dish." For a moment, silence hung heavy between them. Ryan's eyes narrowed, disbelief flashing across his face. "Are you out of your mind?" Ashley held her ground. "I overheard them," she said, gesturing subtly toward the women. "They were talking about Jennifer. Your wife, please, trust me. Don't eat it." Ryan glanced at the plate, then at the women. One of them shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. He didn't believe Ashley, not entirely, but the certainty in her voice planted a seed of doubt. He set his fork down. "Fine," he said. His tone clipped. "Explain yourself." Ashley hesitated, aware that any wrong move could cost her the job she desperately needed. "I heard them mention your wife's name. They said they needed to make sure you ate it. I've seen them here before. Always watching you, please, Mr. Carter. Something's not right." Ryan leaned back in his chair, studying her. Ashley's sincerity was undeniable, but his logical mind resisted the absurdity of her claim. Still, he called the waiter and instructed him to remove the dish. "Send the chef out," Ryan demanded. The two women at the nearby table exchanged a panicked glance before hurriedly leaving the restaurant. Ashley exhaled, her heart pounding as she watched them disappear through the door. "Wait!" Ryan called after them, but they were gone. Turning back to Ashley, he said, "You'd better hope you're right about this." His tone was sharp, but there was a hint of unease in his expression. Ashley nodded, her resolve unwavering. "I am." As Ryan left the restaurant that night, his thoughts were a whirlwind. Who were those women? And why would Jennifer, his wife, be involved in something so sinister? Questions swirled in his mind as his car glided through the quiet streets toward his mansion. One thing was certain. Ashley's warning had sparked a fire he couldn't ignore. Ryan Carter's mind buzzed as he pulled into the long driveway of his sprawling mansion in Greenwich. The grand structure, with its towering columns and manicured hedges, usually filled him with a sense of pride and accomplishment. Tonight, however, it felt colder, its vastness amplifying the unease sparked by Ashley's cryptic warning. He stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching under his polished shoes, and made his way to the front door. The house was eerily silent as he entered, the only sound being the faint ticking of a grandfather clock in the foyer. "Jennifer," he called out, his voice echoing through the space. No response. Ryan climbed the staircase, his thoughts racing. Could Ashley's words hold any truth? Jennifer had been distant lately, but he had chalked it up to the usual strains of a high-profile marriage. As he reached the master bedroom, he noticed the door slightly ajar and a dim light spilling into the hallway. Pushing it open, he froze. Jennifer Wallace, his impeccably dressed and always composed wife, was hunched over a suitcase on the bed. Strewn around her were stacks of cash, passports, and documents he couldn't immediately identify. The sight was jarring, a stark contrast to the poised image she always projected. "Going somewhere." Ryan's voice was steady, but the accusation in his tone was impossible to miss. Jennifer flinched, her manicured fingers pausing mid-motion. She looked up, her face pale but quickly masked with feigned innocence. "Ryan, you startled me. I was just organizing some things." "Cut the act," he said, stepping closer. "I just had a very interesting evening. Care to explain why 2 women at the gourmet haven were practically conspiring to poison me? And why, when I return home, I find you packing a suitcase like you're about to vanish?" Her expression shifted, panic flashing across her eyes before she composed herself. "Poison? That's ridiculous. You're being paranoid." "Don't," he snapped. "Not tonight, Jennifer. Start talking." Jennifer straightened, her hands trembling slightly as she closed the suitcase. "Fine. You want the truth." Her voice was sharp, defensive. "Yes, I was planning to leave. I was going to tell you eventually. But I couldn't take it anymore. The scrutiny, the lack of trust, your obsession with control. I need out." Ryan raised an eyebrow, crossing his arms. "And the cash, the passports. That doesn't scream a clean break to me. What are you running from?" She hesitated, and for a brief moment, Ryan thought he saw regret flicker across her face. Then, she dropped her act entirely. "You want the whole story? Fine," she spat. "Joseph and I, your loyal accountant, we've been taking money from your company, just enough to cover our tracks, but enough to live comfortably. Tonight was supposed to be the last step." Ryan's blood ran cold. "Last step," Jennifer smirked, the mask of composure slipping into something far more sinister. "The poison wasn't supposed to kill you, just incapacitate you. By the time anyone found out, Joseph and I would have been long gone." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Ryan clenched his fists, his jaw tightening as a wave of betrayal crashed over him. "You were going to leave me for dead," he said, his voice low but seething with rage. Jennifer shrugged. "You'll be fine. You always are. You're Ryan Carter, the untouchable. I just wanted my share, what I deserve after putting up with this sham of a marriage." Ryan stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. This wasn't just betrayal. This was premeditated destruction from someone he had once trusted implicitly. "You're delusional if you think this ends well for you," he said, his voice steady but laced with fury. Jennifer stepped back, her confidence faltering. "What are you going to do, Ryan? Call the police? Ruin your reputation by airing out all our dirty laundry?" Ryan didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Jennifer's eyes widened. "Don't," she warned, her voice trembling now. Ryan ignored her, dialing a number he hadn't used in years. After a few rings, a gruff voice answered. "It's Carter. I need your help," Ryan said. "Now." Jennifer's confidence crumbled. "Ryan, please, we can work this out." But Ryan had already turned away. He walked out of the room, leaving Jennifer standing amidst her ill-gotten gains. His steps were measured, deliberate, as he descended the staircase and made his way to his study. There was no turning back now. As he sat at his desk, staring at the darkened screen of his laptop. The weight of the night pressed down on him. Jennifer's betrayal was just the beginning. He was sure of it. Questions lingered, unanswered and unnerving. How far did this conspiracy reach? And could Ashley's warning have saved more than just his life? Ryan's thoughts circled back to the young waitress with the unshakable resolve. Something about her felt different, genuine. He made a mental note to find her again. She might have seen or heard more than he realized. For now, though, the only thing certain was that his world had been shattered, and the pieces were far from falling into place. Ryan woke the next morning to a heavy sense of unease, the events of the previous night playing on a relentless loop in his mind. The betrayal, the plot, and the sheer audacity of Jennifer's actions left him raw, as sunlight filtered through the grand windows of his study, where he had spent most of the night brooding. A firm knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, his voice hoarse. James, his trusted driver and assistant, entered, his expression unreadable but professional as always. "Sir, your private investigator has arrived. He's waiting in the lounge." Ryan nodded, his jaw tightening. "Send him in." Moments later, a man in his mid-40s with a no-nonsense demeanor strode into the room, dressed in a plain black suit. His presence was understated yet commanding. This was Michael Anders, a pie Ryan had relied on in the past for discreet matters. "Michael," Ryan said, gesturing toward the chair across from his desk. "Thanks for coming on such short notice." Michael sat, his sharp eyes scanning Ryan's face. "You sounded urgent. What's going on?" Ryan wasted no time, recounting the events at the restaurant, the confrontation with Jennifer, and the shocking confession about Joseph. Michael listened intently, taking notes as Ryan spoke. "So," Michael said when Ryan finished, "you're saying Jennifer and your accountant were not only embezzling from your company but also plotted to poison you. That's bold." Ryan's lips twitched in something that could have been a humorless smile. "Bold isn't the word I'd use, but yes, I need you to dig into this. Everything, the finances, Jennifer's connections, Joseph's movements. I want to know the scope of this betrayal." Michael nodded. "Consider it done. And the waitress, Ashley, right? Do you think she's involved in any way?" "No," Ryan said quickly, surprising even himself with his certainty. "She warned me, if anything. She saved my life. But I want to know more about her too. She mentioned her father, Thomas Bennett. That name rings a bell, but I can't place it." Michael's brows furrowed. "Thomas Bennett. Wasn't he your business partner years ago? The one who disappeared?" Ryan froze. The name now struck him like a lightning bolt. Thomas Bennett, his old partner, a brilliant and principled man who had vanished under mysterious circumstances nearly a decade ago. They had built one of Ryan's earliest ventures together, but Thomas had left abruptly, and Ryan had never been able to get answers. Could Ashley really be his daughter? "Find out everything you can about her and her family," Ryan said, his tone low but resolute. "And Michael, be discreet." Michael rose, slipping his notepad into his pocket. "You know me. I'll get to the bottom of this." As Michael left, Ryan leaned back in his chair, the weight of the new connection settling over him. If Ashley truly was Thomas's daughter, what did that mean for her warning last night? Could this all be tied to something deeper? Something from the past? Meanwhile, at the Gourmet Haven, Ashley was back on the clock, her expression calm, but her nerves frayed. She had spent the night replaying her conversation with Ryan and the panic on the women's faces as they fled the restaurant. For years, she had kept her head down, focused solely on providing for her siblings. Now, she was entangled in a dangerous web she didn't fully understand. "Hey, Ashley," called a fellow server, snapping her out of her thoughts. "Table 6 is asking for more coffee." "On it," she replied, forcing a smile as she grabbed a fresh pot from the counter. As she poured coffee for an older couple at the table, her peripheral vision caught a familiar figure entering the restaurant. Her hand faltered for a moment before she steadied herself. It was Ryan, and he was heading straight for her. "Ashley," he greeted, his tone firm but not unkind. She set the coffee pot down and met his gaze. "Mr. Carter, I wasn't expecting to see you again so soon. I need to talk to you," he said, his expression serious. "Do you have a moment?" Ashley hesitated, glancing around the busy restaurant. My break's in 10 minutes, we can talk then. Ryan nodded and took a seat at an empty table near the back. True to her word, Ashley joined him minutes later, sitting across from him with her arms crossed. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice steady despite the unease curling in her stomach. "I owe you an apology," Ryan began, "for doubting you last night. You were right about everything, and because of you, I'm still here to figure this mess out." Ashley blinked, surprised by his candor. "I was just doing what I thought was right." "You don't owe me anything." Ryan leaned forward. "You mentioned your father, Thomas Bennett. Was he a businessman?" Ashley stiffened. "Yes, but he disappeared when I was little." "Why?" Ryan took a deep breath, unsure how much to reveal. "Thomas and I were partners once." Hearing his name again, it's brought up a lot of questions. "I think there's more to all of this than we realize." Ashley stared at him, her mind racing. For years, her family's only answers about her father's disappearance had been vague and unsatisfying. Now, this man, a stranger, was suggesting there might be more to the story. "I don't know what you're looking for," she said carefully, "but my father was a good man. If you think—" "I don't think anything yet," Ryan interrupted gently, "but I want to help you find the truth, if you'll let me." Ashley hesitated, torn between her instincts to trust no one and the undeniable sincerity in his voice. Finally, she nodded. "All right, but we do this carefully." Ryan smiled faintly, the first glimmer of hope piercing the darkness surrounding him. "Carefully it is." The soft click of Jennifer Wallace's heels echoed through the corridor of the Greenwich County Jail. Her perfectly manicured fingers gripped the cold metal of the telephone in the visitor's booth as she stared through the glass at Joseph Turner. The once dignified accountant now looked disheveled, his tie loosened and his face pale. "You had one job, Jennifer," Joseph hissed, his voice low and venomous. "How did it fall apart this fast?" Jennifer leaned closer, her expression cool, but her voice sharp. "Don't you dare pin this on me. How was I supposed to know that Waitress would meddle? Ryan was supposed to eat the damn dish, pass out and stay out of our way until we were gone." Joseph scoffed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "And now what? He knows he's probably digging into everything if he connects the dots to the old deal." Jennifer's eyes darkened. "He won't. That deal is buried. Thomas Bennett's disappearance was handled." "Was it?" Joseph shot back, his tone biting. "Because Ryan's no fool. If he starts sniffing around Bennett's name, it's only a matter of time before he puts it all together." Jennifer's composure faltered for a split second before she regained control. "You're right about one thing. Ryan isn't stupid, but he's also predictable. He'll focus on the obvious. Me, you, the money. He doesn't have the time or energy to dig into something from years ago." Joseph leaned back, his jaw tight. "You'd better hope you're right, because if he does, we're done." Jennifer didn't reply immediately, her mind racing. Ryan's persistence was a problem, but she wasn't about to let him or anyone else ruin her plans. She had climbed too high to be dragged down now. Back at his mansion, Ryan sat in his study, poring over old documents from his early days in business. The name Thomas Bennett appeared repeatedly. On contracts, meeting minutes, and even photos of the two men shaking hands at celebratory events. The memories were bittersweet. Thomas had been more than a partner. He had been a friend. His sudden disappearance all those years ago had felt like a betrayal. But now, Ryan wondered if it was something far more sinister. The sound of Michael's voice interrupted his thoughts as the investigator entered the room, a file in hand. "I've got something for you." Ryan gestured for him to sit. "What did you find?" Michael opened the file, revealing a few photos and handwritten notes. Thomas Bennett's disappearance wasn't as clean as it seemed. Officially, he walked away from your company and vanished. But unofficially, there were whispers of foul play. Financial irregularities started cropping up shortly before he disappeared. Money was being moved around, similar to what Jennifer and Joseph have been doing. Ryan's brow furrowed. "Are you saying Jennifer and Joseph were involved with Thomas's disappearance?" Michael hesitated. "It's too early to say for sure, but there's a pattern, and here's where it gets interesting. Thomas's wife died in a car accident shortly after his disappearance. Ashley, their daughter, ended up in the foster care system." Ryan's chest tightened. "She told me she lost her parents, but this is bigger than I thought. If Jennifer and Joseph had something to do with it, I need to know." Michael nodded. I'll keep digging. In the meantime, what's your plan? Ryan stared at the file, his resolve hardening. First, I need to talk to Ashley again. If she's Thomas's daughter, she deserves to know the truth. And then, I'm going to make sure Jennifer and Joseph pay for everything they've done. At the Gourmet Haven, Ashley finished wiping down a table as the lunch rush began to die down. The bell over the door jingled, and she looked up to see Ryan walking in, his expression unreadable. Back so soon? She asked, trying to keep her tone light despite the knot forming in her stomach. Ryan gave a faint smile. I need to talk to you, privately. Ashley hesitated but nodded, leading him to a quiet corner of the restaurant. What's going on? She asked, sitting across from him. Ryan placed a file on the table, his fingers tapping its edge. I've been looking into your father. Ashley stiffened. Why? What does he have to do with this? Because I think his disappearance and what's happening now are connected, Ryan said, his voice calm but serious. Thomas Bennett wasn't just my business partner. He was one of the best men I've ever known. When he vanished, I thought he'd betrayed me. But now I'm not so sure. Ashley stared at him, her heart pounding. You think my dad was, what, killed? By who? Ryan sighed, his gaze meeting hers. I don't have all the answers yet, but I think Jennifer and Joseph might have been involved. The financial irregularities, the timing, it all lines up. Ashley's hands clenched into fists. If that's true, if they had anything to do with what happened to my dad, I'll make sure they pay, Ryan interrupted, his voice firm. But I need your help. Anything you remember, any details about your father, could be important. Ashley hesitated, memories of her childhood flashing through her mind. She thought of her father's laugh, his reassuring presence, and the day he didn't come home. I don't remember much, she admitted, but I'll help, whatever you need. Ryan nodded, relief flickering in his eyes. Thank you. As they parted ways, Ashley felt a mix of anger and determination rising within her. If there was even a chance that Ryan was right, she owed it to her father to find out the truth. The evening air was crisp, as Ryan Carter stood on the balcony of his mansion, his eyes fixed on the city lights below. His thoughts churned, filled with fragments of conversations, financial documents, and the faces of the people he had once trusted. Jennifer and Joseph had betrayed him in ways he was only beginning to comprehend. And now the shadow of Thomas Bennett's disappearance loomed over everything. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Come in, he called. Michael Anders stepped inside, a fresh stack of files in hand. I've got more, he said, placing the documents on the desk. And you're not going to like it. Ryan turned, crossing the room to join him. What did you find? Michael opened one of the files, revealing copies of bank statements and emails. These are from Jennifer and Joseph's accounts. They were funneling money out of your company for years. But that's not the worst part. I found evidence of payments made to an offshore account under the name Wallace Holdings, Jennifer's maiden name. It looks like this account was set up shortly after Thomas disappeared. Ryan's jaw tightened. You're saying she was stealing from me even back then? Michael nodded grimly. It's more than that. The timing coincides with Thomas's disappearance and the financial discrepancies in your company's early years. I don't think this was just embezzlement. I think Jennifer and Joseph orchestrated his disappearance to cover their tracks. The room seemed to grow colder as Ryan processed the implications. Thomas hadn't just vanished. He had been eliminated, and the people responsible were living under his roof for years. What about Ashley? Ryan asked, his voice quieter now. She's his daughter. Does she have any idea what they did? Michael shook his head. From what I can tell, she's been in the dark her whole life. But there's something else. Jennifer and Joseph were cautious, but they made mistakes. There's a record of a meeting at a private estate weeks before Thomas vanished. The owner of that estate, Jennifer's brother, Alan Wallace. Ryan exhaled sharply, his anger simmering. Then Alan might know something. Michael closed the file. What's your next move? Ryan didn't hesitate. We confront him. I want to hear what he knows. If he's involved, we'll make sure he pays for it. The next morning, Ryan drove to Ashley's modest apartment. He hadn't told her what Michael had uncovered yet, knowing the news could be overwhelming, but he needed her to understand the stakes. Ashley opened the door, her expression wary but curious. Ryan, what's going on? "Can I come in?" he asked. She stepped aside, letting him enter. The apartment was small but tidy, with signs of a busy life. Stacked dishes in the sink, textbooks on the kitchen counter, and photos of her siblings on the walls. Ryan couldn't help but feel a pang of respect for how much she had endured. "I found something," he began, taking a seat on the worn couch. "Something about your father." Ashley crossed her arms, her jaw tightening. "Tell me." Ryan explained everything Michael had discovered. The offshore accounts, the suspicious payments, and the link to Jennifer's brother, Alan. With each revelation, Ashley's face shifted from confusion to anger. "So, you're saying my dad didn't just disappear?" she said finally. They did something to him." Ryan nodded. "I believe so. And I think Alan Wallace might have answers." Ashley sat down, her hands trembling slightly. "All this time, I thought it was just bad luck, that he got in over his head or walked away. But this is worse." Ryan leaned forward, his voice firm but gentle. "We can't change what happened to your father, but we can get justice. I want you to come with me to confront Alan." Ashley hesitated, her gaze flickering to the photos of her siblings. "And if he's involved, what then?" "Then we expose him," Ryan said. "No matter what it takes." She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "All right, let's do it." Later that day, Ryan and Ashley arrived at Alan Wallace's estate, a sprawling property hidden behind high gates and dense trees. The air was tense as they were escorted into Alan's study, a room lined with shelves of leather-bound books and antique furniture. Alan Wallace rose from behind his desk, a genial smile on his face. "Ryan Carter," he said, extending a hand. "This is unexpected. And who's this lovely young lady?" "This is Ashley Bennett," Ryan said, his tone cold. "Thomas Bennett's daughter." Alan's smile faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. "Ah, Thomas, a good man. I was sorry to hear about his disappearance." Ryan didn't waste time. "Cut the pleasantries, Alan. We know you had a meeting with Jennifer and Joseph before Thomas vanished." "I want to know what happened." Alan's expression hardened. "I don't know what you're talking about." Ashley stepped forward, her voice trembling but resolute. "Don't lie to me. My father is dead, isn't he? You helped them cover it up." Alan hesitated, his eyes darting between Ryan and Ashley. "You're making serious accusations," he said finally. "Be careful." Ryan leaned in, his voice low and dangerous. "We have records, Alan. Bank transfers, meeting logs. We can connect the dots, so tell us the truth now, or I'll make sure you regret it." Alan swallowed hard, his confidence visibly wavering. "All right," he said reluctantly. "I'll tell you what I know, but you're not going to like it." Alan Wallace leaned back in his chair, his hand trembling as he reached for a glass of water on the desk. His once composed demeanor was unraveling under Ryan and Ashley's unrelenting stares. "Fine," Alan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But if I'm going to talk, you both need to understand. This wasn't all my doing. I didn't know how far Jennifer and Joseph would take it." Ryan crossed his arms, his expression hard and unyielding. "Start from the beginning." Alan took a deep breath, avoiding Ashley's piercing gaze. "Years ago, Jennifer came to me with a proposal. She and Joseph had discovered irregularities in the company's finances, things that could trace back to Thomas. But instead of reporting it, they saw an opportunity to shift the blame." "Shift the blame," Ashley interrupted, her voice sharp. "My father wasn't stealing." "No," Alan admitted, his shoulders slumping. "He wasn't. But Jennifer and Joseph made it look that way. They manipulated the records to make it appear as though he'd been embezzling. They said it was a way to protect the company, something about preventing an external investigation. I didn't question it at first, I should have." Ryan's fists clenched at his sides, but he stayed silent, letting Alan continue. "They invited me to a meeting," Alan said, his voice trembling. "It was supposed to be about how to confront Thomas and resolve things quietly. But when Thomas arrived, everything changed. Jennifer and Joseph accused him outright, yelling, throwing false evidence in his face. He was furious. He threatened to go public, to expose everything. That's when Jennifer, she lost it." Ashley's breath caught in her throat. "What did she do?" Alan looked away, Shame etched across his face. She had someone waiting outside, a man she hired, someone who wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. They took Thomas away. Ashley's legs felt weak, and she gripped the edge of the desk to steady herself. Took him where? I don't know, Alan said quickly, panic rising in his voice. I swear, I don't know. I was told to stay quiet, that everything would be handled a few weeks later. Jennifer told me Thomas had disappeared, and that it was better for everyone if we moved on. Ryan's voice cut through the silence like a blade. And you just went along with it. Alan's face flushed with anger and shame. What was I supposed to do? She threatened me, Ryan. She said if I didn't cooperate, she'd ruin me. My career, my family. It was all on the line. Your cowardice cost an innocent man his life, Ryan snapped. And now you're going to help us fix it. Alan looked at him, fear flickering in his eyes. What do you want from me? Everything, Ryan said. Names, locations, anything you remember about the people she worked with. And if you even think about lying. I'm not lying, Alan interrupted, his voice cracking. I'll give you everything I have, just keep my name out of it. Ashley, who had been silent, finally spoke. Her voice was cold and steady. You think you deserve protection. You helped destroy my family. You don't get to walk away from this. Alan flinched, his gaze dropping to the floor. I'm sorry, he muttered. I truly am. Ryan placed a hand on Ashley's shoulder, his grip firm but reassuring. Let's go, he said, turning toward the door. As they walked out of the estate, the cool air hit Ashley like a slap. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of anger, grief, and disbelief. Ryan led her to his car, opening the passenger door for her. Are you okay? He asked, his voice softer now. Ashley shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. No, I'm not. He didn't even care enough to stop them, my dad. He trusted those people. Ryan's jaw tightened. I know, and we're going to make sure they pay for what they did. But we need to be smart about this. As they drove back toward the city, Ashley stared out the window, her mind racing. She didn't just want justice. She wanted answers. And she wasn't going to stop until she had them, later that evening. Ryan met with Michael in his study. The investigator had been busy during their meeting with Alan and now had more updates. I traced some of the names Alan mentioned, Michael said, spreading out photos and documents on the desk. The man who took Thomas. His name is Victor Ruiz. He's a known enforcer. Works under the radar for wealthy clients. He's dangerous, Ryan. Where is he now? Ryan asked, his tone sharp. Michael tapped a photo of a nondescript building. He's been spotted here, in a warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It's risky, but if you want answers, that's where you'll find them. Ryan nodded, his resolve hardening. Then that's where we're going. Michael raised an eyebrow. I'm not sending anyone else to clean up my mess, Ryan said. This is personal. Michael sighed. All right, but if you're going, we do this carefully, no surprises. As they finalized their plan, Ryan's mind drifted to Ashley. She deserved to know the truth about her father, no matter how painful it was. And if confronting Victor Ruiz was the only way to get those answers, then so be it. The night air was heavy as Ryan and Michael pulled up outside the warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The building was nondescript, its weathered exterior blending into the industrial surroundings. A single flickering streetlight cast long shadows across the pavement, amplifying the tension in the air. This is the place, Michael said, his voice low as he killed the engine. He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a small flashlight and a compact pistol. We don't know what we're walking into. Stay behind me. Ryan nodded, his jaw tight. I didn't come all this way to stand back, Michael. Let's get this done. Michael sighed, but didn't argue. Together they approached the side entrance, their footsteps muffled by the cracked asphalt. Michael picked the lock with practiced efficiency, and the door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit interior. Inside, the warehouse smelled of oil and rust. Crates and machinery were scattered across the floor, creating a labyrinth of shadows. The faint hum of a generator filled the space, masking any distant sounds. Michael motioned for Ryan to follow as they moved cautiously deeper into the building. They found Victor Ruiz seated at a table in the corner, his back to them. He was a stocky man with a thick neck and a menacing presence. Even in the way he casually leaned back in his chair, A glass of whiskey sat untouched on the table beside him, and his phone screen glowed faintly in the dark. Michael signaled to Ryan to stay quiet as he stepped forward, but the creak of a loose floorboard gave them away. Victor turned sharply, his eyes narrowing when he saw them. "Well, well," Victor said, his voice gravelly. "If it isn't Ryan Carter, to what do I owe the pleasure?" Ryan didn't flinch. "We need to talk," Victor smirked, leaning forward. "Talk. You break into my place, and you think we're just gonna chat like old friends." Michael stepped in, his gun raised. "We're not here to play games, Ruiz. You're going to tell us what happened to Thomas Bennett." At the mention of the name, Victor's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of recognition. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Bennett. That's a name I haven't heard in a long time." Ryan stepped closer, his voice firm. "You took him. Jennifer Wallace and Joseph Turner hired you to make him disappear. Where is he?" Victor chuckled, though there was no humor in the sound. "You think you can just walk in here and demand answers? You're more naive than I thought." Michael cocked the gun, the click echoing in the cavernous space. "Try us." Victor's expression darkened, but he didn't move. "All right, fine. You want the truth? I'll give it to you. I was hired to take Bennett out of the picture." "Yes, but killing him, that wasn't my job." Ryan's stomach twisted. "What does that mean?" Victor shrugged. "My orders were to deliver him to a location outside the city. From there, he wasn't my problem anymore. Whatever happened after that, you'll have to ask your charming ex-wife and her little accountant friend." Ryan clenched his fists. "Where did you take him?" Victor hesitated, his gaze flickering between Ryan and Michael. Finally, he sighed. "An old property near the docks. It used to be a storage facility for shipping containers. I dropped him off and left. That's all I know." Michael glanced at Ryan, then back at Victor. "If you're lying..." "I'm not," Victor interrupted, his tone sharp. "Believe me, I've got no reason to cover for them. Jennifer hasn't exactly been sending me Christmas cards." Ryan's voice was cold. "Why did you agree to this in the first place? Did you even care what you were doing to an innocent man?" Victor's smirk returned, though it lacked its earlier confidence. "Innocent. Nobody's innocent in your world, Carter. Everyone's got dirt on their hands, including you." Ryan took a step forward, his voice like steel. "I might have dirt on my hands, but I don't bury people. You're just a hired thug who sold your soul for a paycheck." The tension in the room was thick. But Victor didn't respond. Instead, he reached for his whiskey, taking a slow sip as if dismissing them. "That's all I've got for you. Take it or leave it." Michael grabbed Ryan's arm, pulling him back. "We've got what we need. Let's go." Ryan hesitated, his fury barely contained, but he nodded and followed Michael out of the warehouse. The cool night air hit him like a slap as they stepped outside. "We need to check out the docks," Ryan said, his voice tight. Michael nodded. "Agreed, but we need backup. If they left any evidence there, it won't be unguarded." Ryan's phone buzzed in his pocket as they climbed back into the car. It was Ashley. He hesitated before answering, knowing she would want to know everything they had learned. "Ryan," she said, her voice tense. "Did you find anything?" He exhaled, gripping the steering wheel. "We're heading to the docks. I think we're getting closer." "Let me come with you," Ashley insisted. "No," Ryan said firmly. "It's too dangerous." "But, Ashley," he interrupted, his tone softening. "I promise. I'll keep you updated, but you need to trust me on this." There was a pause before she finally said, "All right, be careful." Ryan ended the call and stared out at the road ahead. The docks were waiting, and with them, the answers he had been chasing for years. But deep down, he knew the truth might be harder to face than anything he had imagined. The car's headlights illuminated the narrow, deserted road leading to the docks. The air was thick with the scent of salt water and decay, a stark contrast to the polished world Ryan was accustomed to. His grip on the steering wheel tightened as Michael sat beside him, scanning the surroundings for any sign of activity. "This place gives me the creeps," Michael muttered, his hand resting near his holster. "You sure about this, Ryan?" Ryan nodded, his jaw set. "If there's any chance we find answers here, I'm not turning back." They parked just outside the gates of an old storage facility, the rusted metal sign barely visible in the dim moonlight. The facility was a maze of shipping containers stacked haphazardly, their faded colors blending into the night. Ryan and Michael stepped out of the car, their footsteps muffled by the gravel beneath them. Michael handed Ryan a flashlight. "Keep it low. No need to announce we're here." The two moved cautiously, weaving between the containers. The faint sound of water lapping against the docks added to the eerie stillness. Ryan's mind raced with the possibilities. If Thomas had been brought here, would there still be any trace of him? Or had Jennifer and Joseph covered their tracks too well? "Over here," Michael whispered, motioning toward a cluster of containers set apart from the rest. One of them had its lock broken, the metal clasp hanging loosely. Ryan's pulse quickened as he stepped closer. Michael nudged the container's door open, the hinges groaning in protest. Inside, the air was stale, and the faint smell of dampness clung to the walls. The beam of Ryan's flashlight swept across the space, revealing discarded ropes, a tattered chair, and the faint outline of something scratched into the wall. "What is that?" Ryan asked, moving closer. Michael joined him, his own flashlight illuminating the markings. It was a name, crudely etched into the metal. Thomas Bennett. Ryan's breath caught in his throat. "He was here." Michael nodded grimly, his expression unreadable. "Looks like they held him here. But for how long?" Ryan's hands clenched into fists as the reality sank in. His friend, his partner, had been dragged to this place, abandoned and alone. The anger simmering beneath the surface threatened to boil over. "Let's keep looking," Michael said, placing a hand on Ryan's shoulder. "There might be more." They exited the container and continued through the facility. The further they went, the more signs of recent activity they noticed. Discarded cigarette butts, fresh tire tracks, and the faint glow of a light in the distance. "Someone's here," Michael said, his voice barely audible. Ryan's heart pounded as they approached the light source. It was coming from a small office building near the water's edge. The sound of muffled voices reached their ears, and Michael signaled for Ryan to stay low, peering through a broken window. They saw two men inside, their faces partially obscured by shadows. One of them was pacing, a phone pressed to his ear. The other was seated at a desk, flipping through what looked like a stack of documents. Michael pulled Ryan back, his voice a whisper. "Those documents, they could be connected to Thomas. We need to get in there." "How?" Ryan asked, his voice tense. "Follow my lead," Michael said, slipping a knife from his belt. He crept around the side of the building, disabling the lock on the back door with practiced ease. They entered silently, their footsteps muffled by the worn linoleum floor. Inside, the voices were clearer. The man on the phone was agitated, his tone sharp. "I don't care what she said. If Carter's sniffing around, we need to move everything now. No loose ends." Ryan's stomach turned. Jennifer's name wasn't mentioned, but it was clear they were working for her, or at least someone tied to her. Michael motioned for Ryan to stay back as he approached the men. In a swift move, he knocked the standing man unconscious with the butt of his gun, catching the second man off guard. "What the seated man started, but Michael silenced him with a sharp glare and the barrel of his pistol. "Don't scream," Michael warned, "unless you want this to end badly for you." The man raised his hands, his eyes wide with fear. "I don't know anything, I swear." Ryan stepped forward, his voice cold. "You're going to tell us everything. Who are you working for? What happened to Thomas Bennett?" the man stammered, his gaze darting between Ryan and Michael. I don't know who Bennett is. We're just moving shipments, that's all." Michael leaned closer, his tone menacing. "Don't lie to us. We found his name on that container. Start talking, or you'll wish you had." The man swallowed hard, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. "Look, all I know is we were told to clear this place out. Someone big is calling the shots. Someone who doesn't want this place connected to them." "Who?" Ryan demanded. "I don't know her name," the man blurted. "She's careful. We only get orders through intermediaries." Ryan exchanged a look with Michael. It was frustratingly vague, but it was enough to confirm they were on the right track. Michael pressed the gun harder against the man's temple. "Where are the documents?" The man pointed to the desk. "There. Take them. Just don't hurt me." Ryan grabbed the stack of papers, quickly scanning them. Among the invoices and logs, one name stood out: Jennifer Wallace. Alongside it was another, Alan Wallace. "She's been using her brother to clean up her mess," Ryan muttered. "And it looks like he's been more involved than we thought." Michael glanced at the papers. "This is enough to tie them to the docks. But we need more. Something concrete about Thomas." The man on the floor whimpered. "Please, I don't know anything else." Michael gave him a final glare before stepping back. "If you're lying, we'll be back." As they left the office, Ryan's grip tightened on the papers. They were closer to unraveling the truth, but every answer seemed to lead to more questions. Somewhere in the shadows, Jennifer and her web of lies were unraveling. Ryan just had to pull the right thread. Ryan sat at his desk. The stack of documents from the docks spread out before him like a sinister jigsaw puzzle. Each paper hinted at something deeper, more insidious. A tangled web of Jennifer and Alan Wallace's schemes. The dim light of the study lamp cast long shadows over the room, but Ryan was too focused to notice the passing hours. Michael stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear. "Yes," he said curtly. "I want everything on Wallace Holdings. Bank records, property transactions, the works." After a moment, he hung up and turned to Ryan. "I've got my team pulling more on Jennifer and Alan. If there's dirt, we'll find it." Ryan nodded, but his gaze remained fixed on the papers. This doesn't add up. Jennifer and Alan weren't just covering their tracks. They were building something. These offshore accounts, the shell companies. It's bigger than we thought. Michael leaned against the edge of the desk, arms crossed. It's always bigger with people like them. The more they have, the more they want. Ryan sighed, running a hand through his hair. And Thomas got in their way. Michael nodded grimly. "Speaking of which, did you notice this?" He tapped one of the pages. A shipping log marked with a peculiar insignia. A simple triangle enclosed in a circle. "This emblem, it's not from any legitimate company I've seen." Ryan frowned, leaning closer. "What does it mean?" "I don't know yet," Michael admitted. "But it keeps showing up in these records. Whatever operation they're running, it's tied to this." Ryan's frustration boiled just beneath the surface. He could feel the answers slipping through his fingers, tantalizingly close yet maddeningly out of reach. The next morning, Ryan met Ashley at a quiet cafe downtown. She was seated at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. Despite her composed exterior, the tension in her shoulders betrayed her unease. "Thanks for meeting me," Ryan said as he sat across from her. Ashley nodded, her expression guarded. "Did you find anything at the docks?" Ryan hesitated before sliding a folder across the table. "We're getting closer. These documents link Jennifer and Alan to the docks and to some questionable operations, but we still don't know exactly what happened to your father." Ashley opened the folder, her eyes scanning the papers. Her face hardened as she recognized Jennifer's name alongside Alan's. So they were involved all this time. Ryan leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "I know this is a lot to take in, but we're not stopping until we get the full story. I just need you to trust me." Ashley closed the folder, her hands trembling slightly. "I don't have much of a choice, do I?" "You do," Ryan said. "But I hope you'll stay with me on this. We're closer than we've ever been." After a moment, Ashley nodded. "All right. What's next?" Later that evening, Ryan and Michael returned to Ryan's study to review their findings. Michael's phone buzzed with an incoming call, and he quickly answered. "What do you have?" as the voice on the other end spoke. Michael's expression darkened. He hung up and turned to Ryan. "We've got something. One of Alan's properties just outside the city. It matches the location from the shipping logs. It's been inactive for years, but there's been movement recently. Trucks coming and going, lights on at odd hours." Ryan's mind raced. "Do you think it's connected to Thomas?" Michael shrugged. "Only one way to find out." The drive to the property was tense. The silence in the car broken only by the hum of the engine. The estate was nestled at the edge of a wooded area, its high fences and overgrown grounds giving it an abandoned appearance. But as they approached, the faint glow of lights from inside told a different story. Michael parked the car a safe distance away, and they proceeded on foot, keeping to the shadows. The closer they got, the more signs of activity they noticed. Tire tracks in the dirt, the faint hum of machinery. "It looks like they've got something running in there," Michael muttered. "We need to be careful." They reached the main building, a decrepit structure that seemed to sag under its own weight. Michael picked the lock on a side door, and they slipped inside. The air was thick with the smell of oil and dust. The sound of voices echoed faintly from somewhere deeper within the building. Ryan's heart pounded as they moved through the labyrinth of hallways, every creak of the floorboards beneath their feet making him tense. They stopped outside a room where the voices were loudest. Michael peered through a crack in the door, then turned back to Ryan. "It's Alan," he whispered. "And he's not alone." Ryan nodded, his anger simmering. "Let's see what he has to say." Michael pushed the door open, and the two of them stepped inside. Alan Wallace froze mid-conversation, his face draining of color as he saw them. "Ryan," Alan stammered, forcing a nervous laugh. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," Ryan said coldly, "but I think I already know." Alan glanced at the men around him, clearly calculating his next move. "Look, I don't know what you think you've found." "Save it," Ryan interrupted. He held up a folder. "We've got enough to tie you and Jennifer to everything. The docks, the offshore accounts, Thomas's disappearance. It's over, Alan." Alan's eyes flickered with panic, but he quickly masked it with a smirk. "You think you've got the whole story? You don't know half of it. Then why don't you enlighten us?" Michael said, stepping closer, his tone dripping with menace. Alan hesitated, the weight of their stares bearing down on him. Finally, he sighed. "All right, you want the truth? I'll give it to you, but you're not going to like it." Alan Wallace sank into the nearest chair, his usual air of confidence shattered. His eyes darted between Ryan and Michael, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he exhaled, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "You want the truth?" Alan began, his voice trembling slightly. "Fine, but don't think for a second that I'm the mastermind here. Jennifer's the one who started all of this." Ryan crossed his arms, his piercing gaze locked on Alan. "We're done with excuses, Alan. Talk." Alan hesitated before continuing. "Years ago, Jennifer and Joseph discovered financial discrepancies in your company. At first it was small, a few missing numbers here and there, but Thomas caught wind of it. He was meticulous, and he didn't let things slide." "That sounds like him," Ryan muttered, his jaw tightening. Alan nodded. He started asking questions, digging deeper. Jennifer panicked. She came to me, saying we needed to shut him down before he exposed everything. She convinced me it was for the good of the company, that we couldn't afford the scandal. Ryan's fists clenched. "So you helped her frame him?" Alan flinched at the venom in Ryan's tone. "I didn't think it would go that far. I thought we'd pressure him into stepping down quietly, but Jennifer, she had other plans. She brought in Victor Ruiz." Michael leaned forward, his voice cold. "We already know Ruiz was involved. He took Thomas to a location near the docks. What happened after that?" Alan swallowed hard, his face pale. "I don't know exactly. Jennifer didn't trust me enough to share all the details. She said it was better that way, that the less I knew, the safer I'd be." Ryan's anger boiled over. "Stop lying, Alan. You were part of this from the start." "I'm not lying," Alan protested, his voice cracking. "All I know is that Thomas was handed over to someone else. Jennifer called it cleaning up loose ends. I didn't ask questions and I didn't want to know." Ryan's stomach turned. The thought of his former partner, a man he had once trusted implicitly, being passed from one criminal to another like a pawn in Jennifer's schemes, was almost too much to bear. Michael's voice cut through the tense silence. "Who else was involved? Names, locations, anything you can give us?" Alan hesitated, his gaze flickering toward the door as if he were considering an escape. Michael noticed and stepped closer, his presence looming. "Don't even think about it," Michael warned. "This ends here." Alan sighed in resignation. "There's a storage facility outside the city, one Jennifer used for sensitive deals. If Thomas's trail hasn't gone completely cold, that's the place to check. But I'm telling you, she'll have covered her tracks. Jennifer always stays one step ahead." As Ryan and Michael left the building, the weight of Alan's confession hung heavily in the air. They climbed into Michael's car, the engine rumbling to life as they headed back toward the city. "What do you think?" Ryan asked. Breaking the silence, Michael's expression was grim. "He's a coward, but he's telling the truth. Jennifer's been the puppet master all along." Ryan stared out the window, the city lights blurring into streaks of color. "We're running out of time. If there's anything left at that storage facility, we need to find it before she does." Michael nodded. "I'll get us a team," This isn't something we can handle alone. The next morning, Ashley met Ryan at his mansion. Her face was pale, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion, but her determination was unwavering. "Michael told me what Alan said," she began, her voice steady. "Do you think we'll find anything at that storage facility?" Ryan hesitated before answering. "I don't know, but we have to try." Ashley stepped closer, her hands clenched into fists. "And if we do find something, if it proves what Jennifer did to my dad, what then?" Ryan met her gaze, his voice firm. "Then we take her down, no matter what it takes." Ashley nodded, her resolve hardening. "I'm coming with you," Ryan started to protest. But Ashley cut him off. "Don't try to keep me out of this, Ryan. This is my fight too." After a moment, Ryan relented. "All right, but you stay close, and you follow Michael's lead." That evening, Ryan, Michael, and Ashley arrived at the storage facility Alan had mentioned. It was a sprawling complex, its rows of units stretching into the distance. The air was heavy with the scent of rain, and the occasional rumble of thunder echoed in the distance. Michael motioned for them to stay low as they approached the main gate. Using a set of lockpicks, he quickly disabled the security system, and they slipped inside. The facility was eerily quiet, the only sound their muffled footsteps on the damp pavement. Michael led the way, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. "This is it," Michael whispered, stopping in front of a large unit near the back of the complex. The lock on the door had been broken, and the heavy metal door hung slightly ajar. Ryan pushed the door open, revealing the interior. Stacks of files and crates filled the space, along with a few scattered pieces of furniture. The room felt like a time capsule, frozen in the moment. Jennifer had abandoned it. Ashley's breath hitched as she spotted a stack of papers bearing her father's name. She moved toward them, her hands trembling as she picked up a folder. "Ryan," she said, her voice breaking. "It's his handwriting." Ryan moved to her side, his heart pounding. Together they flipped through the pages, the words revealing Thomas's desperate attempts to expose Jennifer's crimes. The final page was a letter addressed to Ryan, its edges worn and its ink smudged. Ryan read the letter aloud, his voice shaking. "Ryan, if you're reading this, it means I've failed. Jennifer is more dangerous than we ever imagined. Take care of my family, protect Ashley, and never stop fighting for the truth." Tears filled Ashley's eyes, and Ryan placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We'll make this right," he promised. Before they could say more, Michael's voice cut through the moment. "We've got company. Move." The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the storage facility, quick and purposeful. Michael's sharp command, "Move," snapped Ryan and Ashley out of their stunned state. Ryan grabbed the folder Ashley was holding and stuffed it into his jacket. Michael motioned them toward the back of the unit, his flashlight extinguished to keep them hidden in the shadows. "Stay quiet," Michael whispered, his voice barely audible over the distant rumble of thunder. Ashley's breathing was shallow, her pulse racing as she clung to Ryan's side. The faint beam of a flashlight swept across the corridor outside, accompanied by muffled voices. "Check the units," one of the men ordered. "She doesn't want anything left behind." Jennifer, even now, she was covering her tracks, sending her people to clean up the evidence. Ryan clenched his fists, his anger simmering, but Michael's steady hand on his shoulder kept him grounded. The footsteps drew closer, stopping just outside their unit. A sharp click echoed as someone tested the door, nudging it open slightly. Ryan held his breath, his heart pounding, in the faint light spilling into the room. He could make out the silhouette of a man stepping inside. The intruder's flashlight darted across the space, lingering on the stacks of files and crates. Michael moved silently, slipping behind the man in one fluid motion. Before the intruder could react, Michael struck him with the butt of his gun, catching him as he crumpled to the floor. "Let's go," Michael hissed, motioning for Ryan and Ashley to follow. They slipped out of the unit and into the shadows of the storage facility. The other men were still searching nearby, their voices echoing in the cavernous space. "This way," Michael whispered, leading them toward an emergency exit at the back of the building. The faint glow of an exit sign was their guide, but the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder. "They're splitting up," Michael muttered. "They're trying to box us in. What do we do?" Ashley asked, her voice barely a whisper. Michael glanced at her, then at Ryan. "We don't have time to sneak past all of them. I'll create a diversion. You two head for the exit." "No way," Ryan said, his voice low but firm. "We're not splitting up." "You don't have a choice," Michael said. "I'll be fine. Just get her out of here." Before Ryan could argue, Michael moved swiftly toward the center of the facility, knocking over a stack of crates to draw attention. The crash echoed through the building, followed by the sound of running footsteps and shouts. "This way," Ryan urged. Grabbing Ashley's hand and pulling her toward the exit, they reached the door and slipped outside into the cool night air. The rain had started, a light drizzle that masked the sound of their footsteps as they ran toward the car parked just beyond the fence. Ryan glanced back, his chest tight with worry for Michael, but there was no time to wait. "Get in," he said. Unlocking the car and ushering Ashley inside, he slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. The tires skidding slightly on the wet pavement as he sped away, Michael rejoined them nearly an hour later at a predetermined safe house. He arrived drenched but unharmed, his usual composure intact. "Did you get it?" he asked, brushing rain from his jacket. Ryan held up the folder. "We did, but Jennifer's people were thorough. They almost caught us." Michael nodded grimly. "They're desperate. That means we're on the right track." Ashley, seated on the couch, clutched a steaming mug of coffee, her hand still trembling. "What's in those papers?" she asked. "What else did my dad leave behind?" Ryan sat beside her, opening the folder and flipping through its contents. There were more letters, handwritten notes detailing the discrepancies Thomas had uncovered, and a list of names, people he believed were connected to Jennifer's schemes. One name stood out, Victor Ruiz. "We need to go after Ruiz," Ryan said, his tone resolute. "He was the last person to see Thomas alive." Michael frowned. "Ruiz isn't just going to talk, he's dangerous and he's got nothing to lose." Ryan met Michael's gaze, determination burning in his eyes. "Then we make him talk. He's the missing piece." The following day, Ryan and Michael worked tirelessly to track Ruiz's movements. They discovered he had recently surfaced in a rundown motel on the outskirts of the city. Ryan wasted no time, calling Ashley to inform her of their next move. "I'm coming with you," she said immediately. "No," Ryan said firmly. "This isn't like the storage facility. Ruiz is dangerous, Ashley." "So is Jennifer," she countered. "And I'm not sitting on the sidelines while you risk everything to find the truth about my dad." Ryan hesitated, his protective instincts clashing with the knowledge that Ashley had every right to be involved. "All right," he said finally, "but you stay in the car until we're sure it's safe." "Deal," Ashley said, her voice steady. That evening, they arrived at the motel, its flickering neon sign casting an eerie glow over the rain-soaked parking lot. Michael parked the car at the far end, keeping a clear view of Ruiz's room. "He's in there," Michael confirmed, nodding toward a room with a single light on inside. "What's the plan?" Ryan's jaw tightened. "We knock, and we don't leave until we get answers," Michael sighed. "Straightforward. I like it." Ryan turned to Ashley in the back seat. "Stay here. Lock the doors." Ashley nodded but said nothing, her eyes fixed on the motel room. As Ryan and Michael approached the door, the gravity of the moment settled over them. This was it, the next step in uncovering the truth, and whatever they found inside, there would be no turning back. The motel door was chipped and worn, its peeling paint a testament to years of neglect. Ryan and Michael stood just outside, the dim light from the room's single lamp casting faint shadows on the cracked pavement. Michael glanced at Ryan. "Ready?" Ryan nodded, his jaw set. "Let's do this." Michael raised his fist and knocked sharply on the door. For a moment, there was no response. Then, the sound of shuffling footsteps inside grew louder. The door opened a crack, revealing Victor Ruiz's weathered face. His eyes narrowed as he took in the two men standing before him. "What do you want?" Ruiz growled, his voice rough and impatient. Ryan didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, his voice cold and steady. "We need to talk about Thomas Bennett." Ruiz froze for a split second before attempting to slam the door shut. Michael reacted instantly, shoving his foot into the gap and forcing the door open. The two men pushed their way inside, their movements swift and deliberate. Ruiz stumbled back, glaring at them. "You've got some nerve barging in here. Get out before I call the cops." Ryan's laugh was devoid of humor. "Go ahead, Ruiz. I'm sure the cops would love to hear what you have to say about a man who disappeared on your watch." Ruiz's expression hardened, his hands curling into fists. "I don't know what you're talking about." Michael stepped forward, his presence imposing. "Don't play dumb. We know you took Thomas Bennett. We know you delivered him to Jennifer Wallace. What we don't know is what happened after, and you're going to tell us," Ruiz sneered. "You think you can just waltz in here and get me to talk?" "I've got nothing to say." Ryan took a step closer, his eyes blazing with fury. "This isn't about what you want, Ruiz. This is about the truth. And if you don't tell us what happened, we'll make sure Jennifer knows you've been talking to us. Let's see how long you last when she decides you're a liability." Ruiz flinched, his bravado faltering. He glanced between Ryan and Michael, weighing his options. Finally, he sighed, slumping into a chair by the window. "All right," Ruiz muttered. "I'll tell you what I know, but you're not going to like it." Ryan's hands clenched at his sides, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Start talking." Ruiz leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees as he spoke. "Jennifer hired me to take care of Bennett. She said he was a threat to the company, that he knew too much. My job was to grab him and take him to a secure location near the docks." "Which you did," Michael said, his tone sharp. "What happened next?" Ruiz hesitated, his eyes darting toward the door as if considering an escape. Michael shifted slightly, blocking his path. Ruiz sighed and continued. "After I dropped him off, Jennifer had someone else take over. A guy named Carlos Ortega. Let's just say he's not the type you call for cleanup unless you want things messy." Ryan's stomach turned. "What did Ortega do?" "I don't know," Ruiz said quickly, raising his hands defensively. "I wasn't there. But if Jennifer wanted Bennett gone, I can guarantee Ortega made it happen." Ryan's fury boiled over. He slammed his fist onto the table, making Ruiz jump. "You expect me to believe you don't know anything else? That you just walked away?" Ruiz glared at him, his own temper flaring. "You think I liked being part of this? I was just doing my job. If you want more answers, you'll have to find Ortega." Michael crossed his arms. "Where is he?" Ruiz hesitated, then let out a reluctant sigh. "Last I heard, he was laying low in Mexico. Jennifer sent him there to keep him out of sight." Ryan exchanged a glance with Michael. This was the lead they had been waiting for, but it also meant their journey was far from over. "Is there anything else you're not telling us?" Ryan demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Ruiz shook his head. "That's all I know. I swear, if you're smart, you'll drop this. Jennifer doesn't leave loose ends." Ryan stepped back, his gaze piercing. "Neither do I." As they exited the motel room, Ashley was waiting in the car, her eyes wide with worry. "What happened? Did he tell you anything?" Ryan climbed into the driver's seat, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. "He gave us a name, Carlos Ortega. He's the one who took over after Ruiz handed off your father." Ashley's breath hitched. "Where is he?" "Mexico," Michael said from the back seat. "But finding him won't be easy, and even if we do, there's no guarantee he'll talk." Ashley's hands trembled as she processed the information. "So that's it, my dad's. He's gone, isn't he?" Ryan turned to her, his voice firm but gentle. "We don't know that yet, until we get the full story. We can't assume anything." Ashley nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then we go to Mexico." Michael raised an eyebrow. "It's not that simple, Ashley. Ortega's dangerous and Jennifer's reach is long. If we make a move, we need to be prepared." Ryan exhaled, his mind racing. The stakes were higher than ever, but they were closer to the truth than they had been in years. For Thomas, for Ashley, and for himself, Ryan knew there was no turning back. "Then we prepare," Ryan said, his voice steady. "Because this ends with Jennifer, no matter where it takes us." The small jet cut through the clear skies over Mexico, the hum of its engines a constant reminder of the mission ahead. Ryan sat across from Michael and Ashley, the tension in the cabin palpable. Ashley stared out the window, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her seatbelt. "You sure about this?" Michael asked, his tone low as he leaned toward Ryan. Ryan's eyes didn't waver. "We don't have a choice. Ortega's the last piece of the puzzle. If we want to know what happened to Thomas, we need him." Ashley turned away from the window, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I don't care how dangerous he is. If he knows what happened to my dad, I want to hear it from him. Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. Just remember, Ortega isn't like Ruiz. He's not a middleman. He's a predator, and he'll do whatever it takes to protect himself. The small town of San Miguel was nestled in the shadow of a mountain range. Its narrow streets and colorful buildings a stark contrast to the sprawling urban environments Ryan was used to. Ortega's hideout, according to Michael's sources, was a secluded villa on the outskirts of the town, surrounded by high walls and guarded by men who were as dangerous as their employer. The trio arrived in an unmarked SUV, parking at a safe distance. Michael spread a map of the villa on the hood of the car, pointing out the key entry points. 2 guards at the main gate, another 2 patrolling the perimeter. Michael explained, "We'll need to go in quietly if Ortega realizes we're here. We lose any chance of getting him to talk." Ryan nodded, his gaze steady. "And if he doesn't want to talk?" Michael's lips thinned. "Then we make him." Ashley stepped closer, her eyes narrowing at the villa in the distance. "I just want answers, whatever it takes." They approached the villa under the cover of darkness, their footsteps muffled by the soft earth. Michael took the lead, his movements precise as he disabled the perimeter alarm system. Ryan and Ashley followed close behind, their nerves taut as they slipped through a side entrance. The interior of the villa was luxurious but eerily quiet. The faint glow of a chandelier illuminated the main hallway, casting long shadows on the marble floor. Michael motioned for them to stay close as they navigated the space, their progress slow and deliberate. They found Ortega in a private lounge, seated on a plush leather couch with a glass of tequila in hand. He was a stocky man with a thick beard and cold, calculating eyes. His posture was relaxed, but the gun resting on the table in front of him spoke volumes. Ortega looked up as they entered, his expression shifting from surprise to amusement. Well, he said, his voice deep and gravelly. "I wasn't expecting company, and here I thought tonight would be boring." Ryan stepped forward, his gaze locked on Ortega. "We need to talk." Ortega leaned back, a smirk playing on his lips. "Talk? That's funny, coming from a man who just broke into my house." Michael's voice was cold. "This isn't a negotiation. You're going to tell us what happened to Thomas Bennett." Ortega's smirk widened. Bennett. That's a name I haven't heard in a while. What makes you think I have anything to say about him?" Ashley stepped forward, her voice trembling with rage. "Because you were the one who took over after Ruiz. You know what happened to my father, and you're going to tell me." Ortega's gaze shifted to Ashley, his smirk fading. "Your father, so you're the daughter. I always wondered if you'd come looking." Ryan's fists clenched. "Enough games, Ortega. What happened to Thomas?" Ortega sighed, swirling the tequila in his glass before taking a slow sip. "Jennifer hired me to handle Bennett. Yes, she wanted him gone. Clean. No loose ends, but when the time came, I couldn't do it." Ryan blinked, caught off guard. "What? I'm not a saint," Ortega continued, his tone flat. "But Bennett wasn't like the others. He was just a man trying to protect his family. I delivered him to Jennifer's people, but I made sure he was alive when I left." Ashley's breath hitched. "So he's still alive?" Ortega shrugged. "If he is, it's not because of me. After that, Jennifer took over. She didn't trust anyone else to finish the job." Ryan stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous. "Where did she take him?" Ortega's expression darkened. "That I don't know, but if you're smart, you'll walk away now. Jennifer doesn't leave loose ends, and you're poking at a hornet's nest." Ashley's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steady. "I can't walk away. Not now." Ortega sighed, setting his glass down. "There's one more thing. Jennifer kept records. Blackmail, insurance policies, that sort of thing. If you want to know the truth, you'll need to find her safe house in Monterey. That's where she keeps everything." Michael nodded sharply. "Where in Monterey?" Ortega hesitated before rattling off an address. "But if you go there, don't say I didn't warn you." Ryan stared at Ortega, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "If you're lying..." "I'm not," Ortega interrupted, his gaze unflinching. "But if you don't move fast, Jennifer will make sure there's nothing left for you to find." As they left the villa and climbed back into the SUV, Ashley turned to Ryan, her voice trembling. "Do you think he's telling the truth? That my dad might still be alive?" Ryan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. I don't know, but we're going to find out. Michael, seated in the back, glanced at his phone, already making plans for Monterey. If Jennifer's safe house is real, it's our best shot, but we'll need to move quickly. She won't make this easy. Ryan nodded, his resolve hardening. They were closer than ever to the truth, but the final piece of the puzzle lay in Monterey, and as much as Ryan wanted to believe Ortega, he couldn't shake the feeling that the most dangerous chapter of their journey was yet to come. The drive to Monterey was long and tense, the weight of Ortega's revelation hanging over the group like a storm cloud. The closer they got to Jennifer's supposed safe house, the more Ryan's mind churned. Could Thomas truly still be alive? And if he was, what condition would they find him in after all these years? Ashley sat quietly in the back seat, her gaze fixed on the passing landscape. She clutched the folder they had taken from the storage unit, her knuckles white. Michael, in the passenger seat, tapped away on his phone, coordinating backup just in case things went sideways. We're getting close, Michael said, breaking the silence. The address Ortega gave us is in a gated neighborhood, high security, lots of cameras. Ryan gripped the wheel tighter. If Jennifer has been hiding evidence there, she'll have defenses in place. We need to be prepared. Michael nodded. I've arranged for local contacts to stand by. If we need backup, they'll be ready. Ashley finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. What if we're too late? What if she's already destroyed everything? Ryan glanced at her in the rearview mirror. We won't let that happen. They arrived in Monterey, just as night fell, the city lights twinkling in the distance. The neighborhood Ortega had described was nestled on the outskirts, its entrance guarded by a large iron gate and a security booth. Ryan parked a short distance away, and they exited the SUV, blending into the shadows as they approached on foot. Michael pulled out a pair of binoculars, scanning the area. 2 guards at the gate, and a patrol car making rounds every 10 minutes. We'll have to move fast. Ryan turned to Ashley. You stay here. This isn't negotiable. Ashley opened her mouth to protest, but Michael cut in. He's right. If something goes wrong, we can't risk you being caught. Reluctantly, Ashley nodded, retreating to a hidden spot near the SUV. Ryan and Michael moved toward the gate, sticking to the shadows. Michael worked quickly, bypassing the security system and disabling the cameras near the entrance. The gate creaked open just enough for them to slip through. Inside, the neighborhood was eerily quiet. The houses large and imposing, they moved swiftly toward the address Ortega had given them, stopping only when they reached a sprawling villa surrounded by high walls. Michael pointed to a side entrance. That's our way in. Ryan nodded, and they crept toward the door. Michael picked the lock with practiced ease, and they stepped inside. The interior was dimly lit, the air thick with the faint scent of cleaning chemicals. The house was pristine, almost sterile, but it was clear someone had been here recently. Start looking, Michael whispered. Anything that could be a safe or hidden compartment. They split up, moving through the house with purpose. Ryan's heart pounded as he searched the study, pulling books from shelves and feeling along the walls for hidden panels. Minutes passed with no sign of anything significant. Over here, Michael called from the living room. Ryan joined him to find Michael kneeling near a painting that had been pulled aside to reveal a small wall safe. Michael was already working on the lock, his fingers moving deftly. Got it, Michael said, the safe clicking open. Inside were several folders, a flash drive, and a small black book. Ryan grabbed everything, quickly scanning the contents. The files detailed years of transactions, blackmail schemes, and correspondence, all tied to Jennifer and her network. This is it, Ryan said, his voice low. This is the proof we need. Michael nodded, stuffing the evidence into a bag. Let's move, The sound of footsteps interrupted him. Ryan and Michael froze, their eyes darting toward the hallway. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by the faint murmur of voices. They're here, Michael whispered. We need to get out now. The two moved quickly and quietly, retracing their steps toward the side entrance. But as they approached the door, a group of armed men entered, blocking their escape. Ryan's heart sank as he recognized the lead figure, Jennifer Wallace. Well, Jennifer said, her voice dripping with mockery. I knew you'd come sniffing around eventually, Ryan. You always were predictable. Ryan stepped forward, his eyes blazing with anger. It's over, Jennifer. We have everything, the evidence, the names. It's all here. Jennifer's smirk didn't waver. Do you really think that matters? By the time you try to use it, I'll be long gone. Michael raised his weapon, his stance steady. You're not going anywhere. Jennifer raised her hand, signaling her men to hold their positions. You really think you're in control here? This isn't your world, Ryan. It's mine. Ryan took a step closer, his voice low and menacing. You've destroyed lives. Thomas, Ashley's family, everyone who trusted you. And now it's all coming back to you. Jennifer's smirk faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. You always did have a flair for the dramatic, but let's see how far you get with your little crusade. Before she could give an order, the faint sound of sirens filled the air. Michael's contacts had arrived, their timing impeccable. Jennifer's expression darkened, and she turned to her men. Fall back, she barked. Chaos erupted as Jennifer and her men retreated, vanishing into the night before the authorities could arrive. Ryan and Michael wasted no time. Slipping out through the side entrance and making their way back to the SUV, Ashley was waiting, her face pale with worry. What happened? Did you get it? Ryan held up the bag. We did, and Jennifer knows we're coming for her. Michael climbed into the driver's seat, his expression grim. This isn't over, but we've got what we need to bring her down. As they sped away from the villa, Ryan glanced at Ashley, his resolve hardening. The endgame was in sight, and nothing would stop him from uncovering the full truth about Thomas Bennett. The drive back to the safe house was tense, the stolen evidence resting in Ryan's lap like a ticking time bomb. Ashley sat beside him, clutching the folder containing her father's notes. Michael navigated the winding streets with quiet precision, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror every few seconds. Do you think she'll come after us? Ashley asked. Breaking the silence, Ryan turned to her, his voice steady. She will, but we'll be ready. Michael parked the car in the enclosed courtyard of the safe house, a modest but secure location arranged by his local contacts. As they entered, Michael quickly began setting up his laptop to analyze the flash drive, while Ryan and Ashley spread the physical documents across the small dining table. This is insane, Ashley said, her voice a mixture of awe and anger as she scanned the files. Jennifer didn't just frame my dad, she built an empire out of destroying lives. Ryan nodded grimly. She's been running a network of blackmail, embezzlement, and fraud for years, and anyone who got in her way. His voice caught, but he pushed forward. She made sure they disappeared. Michael leaned over his laptop, his face illuminated by the screen. The flash drive has encrypted files, but I'm already breaking through. Whatever's on here, she didn't want anyone to find it. Minutes felt like hours as they waited. Finally, Michael sat back, his expression triumphant. Got it? He turned the laptop toward Ryan and Ashley, displaying a series of video files, email correspondence, and scanned documents. One video stood out, labeled simply, Bennett. Ashley's breath hitched. Play it. Michael clicked the file, and the screen flickered to life. The grainy footage showed Thomas Bennett sitting in a dimly lit room, his hands bound and his face bruised but defiant. He spoke directly to the camera. If you're watching this, Thomas said, his voice steady despite his condition, then you've uncovered what Jennifer Wallace has done. She framed me, destroyed my reputation, and tore apart my family. But she couldn't erase the truth. The evidence is out there. You just have to find it. Ashley's hand flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Dad, Thomas continued, his gaze unwavering. Jennifer thinks she's untouchable, but she's wrong. If you're hearing this, Ryan, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't trust you sooner. And Ashley, if this ever reaches you, know that I never stopped fighting for you. Never. The video ended abruptly, leaving the room in heavy silence. Ryan placed a comforting hand on Ashley's shoulder, his own emotions threatening to overwhelm him. We have what we need now. This proves everything. Ashley wiped her tears, her resolve hardening. We take her down. For him. Michael nodded. There's enough here to blow Jennifer's entire operation wide open. The only question is how we do it. Ryan's jaw tightened. We go public. Expose everything. Her network, her crimes, her lies. Once this is out, she won't be able to hide. Michael hesitated. That's a good plan. But she's not going to sit back and let us do it. She'll come after us, and she'll bring everything she has. Ryan met his gaze. Then we move fast. Then we leak this to the media, get law enforcement involved. Once the wheels are in motion, she won't be able to stop it. Ashley's voice was firm. I'll help. Whatever it takes. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Michael worked on securely transferring the files to trusted media outlets and law enforcement contacts, ensuring the evidence couldn't be intercepted. Ryan coordinated with his own legal team, preparing statements and laying the groundwork for the storm that was about to hit. As dawn broke over Monterey, the first wave of reports began to surface. Headlines flashed across news sites and social media. Business mogul Jennifer Wallace accused in massive fraud and blackmail scandal. Videos of Thomas Bennett's testimony were shared widely, sparking outrage and disbelief. Ryan sat back, exhaustion etched into his features, but a glimmer of satisfaction in his eyes. It's done. The world knows. Ashley, seated beside him, looked up from her phone. Do you think she'll run? Michael, who had been monitoring Jennifer's movements through surveillance contacts, shook his head. Not yet. She's too proud for that. But she'll retaliate. Ryan nodded. Let her come. We're ready. Hours later, as the group prepared to leave the safe house, Michael's phone buzzed. He answered, his expression darkening as he listened. When he hung up, he turned to Ryan and Ashley, his tone urgent. She's here. Ryan's stomach tightened. Jennifer. Michael nodded. Her men are closing in on this location. We need to move now. Ashley's eyes widened, fear flashing across her face. But she steadied herself. What do we do? Ryan grabbed the bag containing the evidence and turned to Michael. We split up, take different routes out of the city. Ashley stays with me. Michael nodded. I'll lead them off. Meet me at the secondary safe house in 6 hours. Ryan didn't hesitate. He grabbed Ashley's hand and led her to the SUV, the weight of the evidence and their mission pressing down on him. As they drove into the bustling streets of Monterey, Ryan couldn't help but glance at the rearview mirror, his mind racing. The endgame was here, and Jennifer was making her move. But so were they. The SUV sped through the busy streets of Monterey, weaving between cars and pedestrians as Ryan kept one eye on the rearview mirror. The glint of headlights following too closely confirmed Michael's warning. Jennifer's men were on their trail. Ashley sat in the passenger seat, clutching the folder of evidence tightly against her chest. Her face was pale but determined, her fear overshadowed by a fierce resolve. They're gaining on us, she said, her voice tense. Ryan's grip on the wheel tightened. Hold on. He veered onto a side street, the narrow alley barely wide enough for the SUV. The pursuing cars hesitated, buying them a few precious seconds. Ryan pressed the accelerator, the tires screeching as they emerged onto another road. Ashley's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her brow furrowing. It's Michael. He says the secondary safe house is secure, but we have to lose them first. Ryan nodded, his mind racing. Tell him we're on our way, and let him know we've got company. Ashley quickly typed out the message, her fingers trembling. Done. Meanwhile, Michael was setting up the safe house, a modest but secure apartment on the outskirts of the city. His contacts had reinforced the location, ensuring Jennifer's men couldn't reach it without significant effort. As he monitored the GPS tracker on Ryan's SUV, his phone buzzed again. They're still being chased, Michael muttered to himself. He grabbed his gear and headed to the door. Time to even the odds. Back in the SUV, Ryan took another sharp turn, the pursuing cars skidding as they struggled to keep up. He spotted a busy marketplace up ahead and made a split-second decision. We're going through there, he said. Ashley's eyes widened. Through? Are you serious? Ryan didn't answer. Swerving into the crowded market, vendors and shoppers scattered, shouting in surprise as the SUV barreled through the narrow lanes. Ryan maneuvered carefully but quickly, using the chaos to their advantage. The pursuing cars slowed, their drivers reluctant to risk plowing through the crowd. Ryan exited the market onto a quiet street, finally putting some distance between them and their pursuers. Ashley exhaled shakily. That was insane. Ryan managed a tight smile. But it worked. They arrived at the secondary safe house just as dusk settled over Monterey. Michael was waiting outside, his expression relieved but focused. He ushered them inside, locking the door behind them. Any injuries? Michael asked, scanning them. We're fine, Ryan said, setting the folder on the table. But Jennifer's men aren't far behind. Michael nodded. Good, let them come. Ashley frowned. What do you mean? Michael tapped the table, his tone calm but firm. We've set a trap. The authorities are on their way, and this place is wired with surveillance. When Jennifer's men show up, we'll have everything we need to nail them. And her. Ryan's eyes narrowed. You're sure this will work? Michael met his gaze. It has to. Hours later, as night fell, the sound of approaching vehicles echoed through the quiet neighborhood. Ryan, Ashley, and Michael crouched behind a reinforced barricade, watching the monitors that displayed live feeds from the surrounding cameras. They're here, Michael said, his voice low. Several black SUVs pulled up outside the safe house. Armed men spilled out, their movements coordinated and precise. Jennifer emerged last, her expression calm, but her eyes cold. She came herself, Ryan murmured. That's a mistake. Jennifer approached the safe house, her voice cutting through the silence. Ryan, let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be. Come out and we can talk. Ryan stepped into view, standing just inside the doorway. Talk. That's rich coming from you, Jennifer. Her smirk didn't waver. You have no idea what you're playing with. Hand over the evidence, and I'll make sure you and the girl walk away. Ashley stepped forward, her voice trembling with fury. You destroyed my father's life. You don't get to make deals. Jennifer's gaze shifted to Ashley, her smirk fading. Ah, the daughter. How touching. But this is bigger than your father. Bigger than you can imagine. Ryan's voice was cold. Not anymore. We've exposed everything. Jennifer's calm demeanor cracked for the first time. You think the authorities will stop me? I own them. Michael, still watching from the monitors, smiled grimly. Not this time. The distant sound of sirens grew louder, and Jennifer's men began to shift uneasily. Flashing lights appeared at the end of the street, and vehicles from local law enforcement surrounded the area. Jennifer's composure slipped entirely as she turned to her men. Take them now. Before her men could act, a team of armed officers stormed the property. Their weapons raised, chaos erupted as Jennifer's men scattered, some trying to fight back while others surrendered. Jennifer turned to flee, but Ryan blocked her path. It's over. She glared at him, her eyes blazing. You don't know what you've done. Ryan's voice was steady. I've done what I should have years ago. Justice! The officers closed in, cuffing Jennifer as she spat curses and threats. Ryan and Ashley watched in silence, the weight of the moment settling over them. Later, at the police station, Ashley sat beside Ryan as they finalized their statements. The evidence they had collected was more than enough to ensure Jennifer's conviction. Michael stood nearby, speaking with the lead investigator. It's done, Ryan said softly. She's finished. Ashley nodded, her voice quiet but firm. And my dad, his name will finally be cleared. Ryan placed a hand on her shoulder. You made this happen, Ashley. Your father would be proud. Tears filled her eyes, but she smiled. Thank you for everything. As dawn broke over Monterey, Ryan, Ashley, and Michael stood outside the station, the air filled with the promise of a new beginning. The weight of the past had been heavy, but now, with Jennifer brought to justice and Thomas's story finally revealed, there was a sense of closure. Ryan looked at Ashley, his voice steady. This isn't the end. It's just the start of something better. Ashley nodded, her smile growing. For him, the three walked away, leaving behind the shadows of the past and stepping into the light of a new day.